Thanks so much, and that's obviously a tough act to follow with Hande and Fadi. We're doing it very different this time as well. I heard in the beginning that it's going to be a balance of different topics, and we're talking AI, and we just talked founder psychology. I was asked to do something a bit more like workshop-like, so I hope you have notepads out and your pens and whatever, because I'm gonna make you do more work than I do, hopefully, at some stage.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Can I say one thing? One thing I'm coming. Sorry, I think I missed to introduce him. You know him actually closely, but he has also very special place at Insider's journey and also personally for me. And to me, he's one of the best storytellers that I have met so far. I learned lots of things from him about storytelling and about also product positionings and also your brand positioning. So with this, he's actually investor identity. He is also pretty much positive influence and also contribution for Insider story in terms of the the whole story itself. We shaped the most important part of the Insider story together. So I think whatever you can get from this session is going to be pretty much valuable for everyone. And thank you very much for Pieter for joining us again, flying to Istanbul. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, I mean, again, Fadi mentioned it, and storytelling is always important. And what was interesting with Insider, and we'll use Insider as a bit of an example throughout. And what I'm about to say, Hande, you won't like, but we've talked about that in the past. When we first saw Insider's deck, and that was when they were less than 5 million ARR, tiny company still, we were like, this is some of the best metrics that we've ever seen. And then after about 3 sessions, 6-7 hours spent, a colleague asked, what do they really do? I don't know. Something with prediction and predictive stuff and segmentation and personalization, and it was very, very hard. And one of the things we see a lot is that there's companies that are actually fantastic in what they do, and founders that are fantastic in what they do, but the story doesn't really come through. Now, very often you don't have those metrics, and then that story becomes even more important, because then you really have to be able to explain why it's so important what you're doing. And so we're going to talk about storytelling a bit. My story actually with Turkey and with Istanbul started in 2017. This is in August 2017 when we first visited Istanbul to meet the team and do a bit more work. And then this is actually in August in 2018, still 7-8 years ago, when we had just, when Insider had just signed the final documents for the investment, and we celebrated the nice backdrop of some of the Singapore Marina Bay Sands, etc. And the story of topic of Go Global, what's interesting with Insider as well is that was in Istanbul, this was in Singapore. I visited teams in Korea, in Turkey, in Indonesia, in France, in London, in the US. It's one of the most global companies, and one of the things that I think is interesting is in many other companies that I work with, we're in board meetings, and you have this whole strategic discussion around, shall we go into this country? Shall we go into that country? And with Insider, it was oh yeah, by the way, we just opened Finland. Oh yeah, and Spain is now open. And and we're we've never discussed this. Was there a business case? And it's no. We think we met something who was amazing. We think they can build Spain. We think it's better to invest in that person there than to discuss adding another AE in another country. So let's do it. And so then, how many countries now, Hande, where we have people on the ground? 29. Okay, yeah. So it is truly global. Anyway, that was a bit about me, but what about you? I just want to check. How many of you are actually founders? Yeah, Fadi, we know you're a founder. How many of you have raised Series B or beyond? Okay, so we have an early stage crowd. How many have raised Series A? Okay, a few. How many have raised seed? Okay. How many have raised nothing? And are you planning to raise, or are you good? Bootstrapping is an option as well. Okay, good. And how many of you are engineers by education? Okay. Now that's a very important question, because one of the things you hear is that engineers are great at engineering and not so great at storytelling. So we'll talk about it. Because some people are actually saying that storytelling is one of the most important things you can do. And Fadi mentioned it just now, and Hande mentioned it, and this guy who I'm sure you remember. But I'll show a quick video. For the longest time, Sequoia Capital was led by a guy called Mike Moritz. He was an investor in Google and in LinkedIn and in Stripe and in Klarna and in a couple of other small tech companies. He's done well. And he talked about it as well in a session that we had with him a while back. Let's have a look.
To me, people often ask, say, just a diversion, if you'll allow me, Andrew, what makes for a good founder? I think actually storytelling is a vital part. If you had to pick one skill, really, outside of technical prowess, understanding a domain product more, it's storytelling. Because it's so essential to everything you do in a startup and in a company. Just think about it. First of all, you've got to tell a story to convince somebody to join you as a co-founder, perhaps, or to join, if you've got a pair of co-founders, to join you in this nutty enterprise that doesn't really exist and that's all smoke and mirrors and a pipe dream. And you've got to convince people to do that. And then you've got to convince them to work super hard and block out absolutely everything else. And then you've got to go and find a customer to buy the thing that you have built and to convince that customer to give you money when nobody else has given you money before. And then you've got to go and tell the story to gullible people like us who'll believe anything that you tell them and to persuade them to invest in your company. And storytelling it's a consistent part of starting, building, and leading any company. And if people can't tell stories, I don't think they succeed as leaders.
So that's a pretty bold statement at the end, right? You can't succeed as leaders if you don't tell story. And so in a way, as a founder, your job is story. And it is telling that story to find that co-founder, to find employees, to find customers and everything. But one of the most important things, and the things we focus on, is the story about your company, your narrative. And specifically in a world where very often you ask people, like, what's the market you operate in? And you get this. This is your market map. This is actually marketing tech. This is where Insider somewhere is, right? And so when that's your market, like, how often does it tell you that you tell someone like what you do and they're like, oh, so you're a bit like this guy? Nah, not really. Oh, you're like that guy? Nah, not really. You can't really explain what you're doing. It's actually really, really hard. And so the question you have to ask yourselves, like, what category are you building? Like, how are you building something where you're hopefully not on someone else's map, but on your own map? And how do you create that map? And so that's a lot about category creation and building your category. And I'll give you two examples of companies that have done that well. Have any of you heard of a company called Qualtrics? Yes. So Qualtrics was a company that actually started to do an exercise around this when they were already, when they'd raised 400 million, when they were pre-IPO, when they were at 250 million ARR, and I went back to some of their old slides. This was some of the key product slides that was around what they were doing, right? And so when you look at this, it's fine, all insights in one place, not bad, customer insights, blah, 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 all good. But people could still ask, like, everyone is talking about insights. Like, how are you different? You're talking about surveys. Are you just doing survey? Hey, when you talk surveys, it's SurveyMonkey. That's the main company, not you, right? Like, why is this interesting? How do you emphasize your tech chops? If you think about insights, but what's really under the hood? This company actually had a lot of engineering, a lot of AI capabilities, even in the early days, but never really spoke about it. And so how to define your category and play bigger? And that play bigger concept comes from a book, which I would recommend all of you guys to read. I think, Melis, you read it, right? You liked it?
I loved it.
Yeah? Okay. And so it's all about how you build new categories, how you dominate markets. And a lot of that has to do, and we'll talk about that in a second, about how you tell your story and how you condition the market to see something that you're seeing and to see a world where what you offer is what is exactly needed, right? But it often has to do with moving a mindset, moving a paradigm away from something. And many folks, and that's why I asked who of you are engineers, because very often engineers are very down in the weeds, looking at the tech, looking at the features. You have to zoom out from that. zoom out from features and specs. It's not about the bits and bytes and the feeds and speeds, but how do you move towards benefits and value? It's not about what you do, but what you enable, and specifically what you enable for your customer, how you allow that customer to transform. In other words, it's not about inputs, but it's about the impact you're creating. It's not about the old game that people were playing, the world that they used to see, but about the world that you're seeing that you can articulate in a way better than that they could, right? That was the old game. This is the new game. And so this is what Qualtrics did in this exercise. They zoomed out from what they were doing, and they asked themselves, in those surveys and in those insights, what are people talking about? What are they around? Well, it's actually always about the experiences that people are having, right? And what types of experiences? It was always around the experiences people have with their employees, with their product, with their brand, etc. And so they said those are the experiences, those are the core of any enterprise. And so they repositioned themselves and started to tell this story about how we live in an experience economy, how they've developed this experience management platform that is built on the 4 core experiences of any business, like customer, employee, brand, and product, those 4 things. And that's what they started to position themselves with. And this was all wrapping up as they went IPO, and then before the IPO happened, SAP actually acquired them. And what was interesting in everything you saw, the CEO of SAP, who is now, I believe, the CEO of ServiceNow, be on CNBC, etc. And this language that he was speaking, he had literally been leaping up like that story around experience management, that positioning, and talked about how experience data came together with operational data and that would create this amazing company, right? And so that really worked very well. Another company, actually, and what's interesting, if you look at SurveyMonkey later on, they started calling themselves an experience manager. So you know, Qualtrics was the follower, was the Me Too in surveys, and then became the leader in the experience management category, if you like. And SurveyMonkey never made it, and became a follower that kind of like passed in a way. One other example, but this was much earlier. So in these 2 companies, who knows Chorus, by the way? Okay, 2 hands. Who knows Gong? Only 3 hands? More people? Okay, Gong is a very, very successful company by now. But they both started in 2015. In 2019, they were both speaking about conversation intelligence. They basically had AI that could listen to conversations and could hear what was going on. Both were exactly at the same stage. They were about, you know, they'd raised 50 million. They were between 10 and 20 million ARR. And then Gong started thinking about this and started working on this and started thinking about, hey, like what category are we really building? Are we in conversational intelligence or what are we doing? And they looked at what people were using their technology for. And so this is actually interesting for both companies, and in many cases the answer lies with your customer. How does your customer speak about you? How is your customer using you? And in this case they saw that there's a lot of types of conversations that this technology could listen to. But the hero use case was voice calls. And it was sales leaders listening to those voice calls with customers to understand what was truly going on. And so Gong started zooming in on it and basically said, hey, every sales leader thinks that they understand their sales and their customers and their revenue. But how do they know that? Oh, we have CRM. Who puts stuff in CRM? Who puts stuff in CRM?
Salespeople.
Who are the people you least trust?
Salespeople.
And so what is in those CRM is opinions of salespeople that you don't trust. It's not reality. And so they came up with this whole concept around revenue intelligence and saying, what if you would have reality, right? Like objectively observed, AI-empowered reality versus opinions. Goodbye opinions, hello reality. Like what if you could have real revenue intelligence? Now what happened, again, they started in 2015. They did this exercise in 2019, launched the revenue intelligence platform. 2 years later, Chorus got acquired for 575 million. Look at the date, July 13th. You think like, oh, that's amazing, that's a lot of money. A month earlier, however, this was a round that Sequoia was in as well, and the previous round as well from earlier on, etc. And since then, they've gone beyond that. So that aspect of making sure that you own your category. Like right now, if you talk about revenue intelligence, Gong is the leader, right? So why do you want to do that? You want to educate. Like if you want to stand out in a differentiated, if you have this category map or this market map that I just saw, you need to stand out. You need to clarify what you're doing, why you're different, how you see the world. If you're doing something truly new, like I've made a seed investment in a company in quantum, building quantum software, etc. Super complex. Like we focus a lot on a story because it's just very important to tell that story because it's truly new. It's also important to hire better. Like a lot of people like don't know what type of company they're really joining. You want to be able to explain what it is that you're doing, why you're doing it, grow, etc. And in the end, you know, there's this concept of the category king, and they've done research that the category kings take 76% of market cap in a certain category. And when you see stuff like this, you know that, hey, in social, it's Meta. In CRM, it's Salesforce. In e-commerce, it's Amazon, etc. Right? And so that's what you want to build. You want to create that category and then obviously lead it and become the category king if you can. Now, sometimes it evolves. Like someone is just successful in execution and they become a leader. But guys like Salesforce have done this, they're the best example of doing this from day one as a discipline. Like Mark Benioff started to sell this concept of software as a bad thing, no more software. He had a logo, basically, you know, branding the problem almost, and then went to that. So category creation is almost like this discipline of creating and developing a new market category. And this concept of conditioning the market is very important. We'll talk about that later. So it will demand your solution and crown your company as a king. And at the core are three aspects that I won't go into detail except for one. One is discovery, like what is that market gap? What is that main pain point? This opinion versus reality, for example, is somehow your lightning moment where you're like, hey, this is where I can build something around. Then often you have to design it. Do I need different partners to execute on this? Do I need to maybe acquire a company? Do I restructure my products and my capabilities and maybe stop selling this one and start selling that one? You design it. And then the last one is category expression, also known as point of view, also known as your category story. And that's how you come back to storytelling. Because in the end, it all comes together in how you tell the story. And so where else to go than Hollywood when you talk about storytelling? So I'll give a couple of basics of storytelling, and then we'll go into a bit more of a workshop style where I'll give a framework that I worked on with Insider and many portfolio companies, and where you can actually try and start drafting some words yourself as well. So far, so good? Yeah. Yeah? Okay, I'll keep the pace up then. So if you think about story, it's actually only two things. It's character and narrative. And those two need to come together. And if you read a review of a movie or a book, it's always around, hey, the narrative was strong, or the plot sucked, or the characters were flat, or the characters were round, which basically means they're very full, very nuanced, very articulated, etc. And so we'll start with character. Who are these two guys?
Nerd and the spy. Q.
Sorry?
Nerd and the spy.
Nerd and the spy, names to it?
James Bond.
And Q, right? Yeah, exactly. We'll get back to them later on. These guys? Yeah? Hero of the story over there, you know her? Katniss, yeah, Katniss Everdeen, The Hunger Games. And last but not least, any Lord of the Rings fans? Right? So, what do these two characters on the slides have in common? On all four?
Same narrative, same story they share.
Yeah, but what's their role in the stories that they're playing?
One of them is the wisdom.
Yeah, keep going. One of them is the wisdom.
The other one is the youngling, so who's gonna learn something. One executes something.
Brain and execution.
So one is the hero of the story, right? And how do we call these guys? I like what you said, wisdom. Any other ways of thinking about that? Yeah, right? You often have another role in the movie, by the way, that's the antagonist. But the most important things are these. You have the protagonist, and you have the mentor, right? The coach, the guide, the mentor. In your startup story, who's the protagonist?
We are.
always get that answer.
Yeah.
You said it as well. The customer is going on a journey, the hero journey, right? And that's the framework that's used a lot. The customer is going on a journey. You want to make that customer successful, so who are you? You give them something. You give them the tools. You give them the magic gifts, as we'll explain later. You give them the way to become successful, to conquer the challenges that they have, to grow faster, save costs, get more productive, conquer their enemies, whatever. So that's very important to realize. That's your role. And in the way you tell your story, that's the way you need to articulate that as well. But I will explain the framework for that in a bit. So character is one. Narrative, story, storyline, whatever is the second. And that actually went back all the way to Aristotle, who used very complex Greek terms. The first one I can pronounce, stasis, the rest I'll leave to you to read. But it always starts with this, the world as we know it, right? Every movie starts like that. There's normal life, the world as we know it. Then there's a change in fortune. Then there's all sorts of stuff happening, problems, suffering, progress, etc. Another way of changing that language a bit more easily is there's normal life. The world changed, what do we do now? Then there's the struggle, the old way isn't working, doing nothing isn't working, it ruins everything. There's a bit of a step forward, a bit of a step back. Then you find a different way, you solve it, and then there's a transformation. I worked a lot on storytelling with a colleague of mine in Sequoia Capital called James Buckhouse. He used to be an animator and then a writer on Shrek and on Matrix and on a bunch of other movies. And he asked these interesting questions. He says, how does every Disney movie end? And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, a dance party. Because a dance party is the ultimate example of transformation. Everyone is happy. There's energy in the room. It started from a problem, right? And it ends in everyone being happy and everything being strong, etc. But that's Aristotle. Like Shakespeare follows the same 5-act structure. There's a setup. There's an inciting incident. Suddenly you learn that a tsunami is hitting, or a meteor is coming to Earth, or a blowfall is going to blow the moon, or whatever. Then there's crisis, climax, and resolution. In Hollywood, they basically simplify that and say beginning, middle, and end. Or another way of thinking about it, which I like, is this concept of the beginning is describing the world as you know it, and then pain. And then there's strain, and then in the end you win and there's gain. And you can actually explain every story. In my family, we always make fun, because when my daughter has read a book or seen a movie and we ask her to summarize it, she summarizes it in 20 long minutes and we still don't know, because she absolutely sucks at summarizing it. But you can actually do it in a very simple fashion. When a great white shark attacks, a local sheriff, a marine biologist, and a salty seafarer form an unlikely team that must stop the shark and save their beach community. Like, very simple summary, but everyone knows which movie it is, right? Which movie is this? Yeah, right? It's very simple. This one is a bit harder. Anyone? Yeah. Isn't that a brilliantly succinct way of summarizing something complex in Star Wars? Right? A young boy is mistreated and misunderstood, learns that he's special, but his new knowledge comes with his own trials and struggles.
Lord of the Rings.
Could have been.
Harry Potter.
Yeah, Harry Potter, right? So that's how kind of like this narrative is always very similar. Now, let's build our own stories, and we're going to watch some movies as well. As I mentioned earlier, right? There's always this scene setting. If you think about it, every movie, and on the flight here, I was starting a new document or a new series yesterday, and again I was noticing the first 10 minutes. I'm like, hey, nothing is happening. No, of course not. Nothing is happening. I get to learn who the characters are. I get to learn about the basic dynamics. I get to know about the locations. It's all scene setting, right? And then something happens. Let's watch a small clip that some of you might recognize. Pretty intense scene. What's the significance of this in the movie for those who've seen it?
Everything changes.
The oppressive,
Yeah, sorry?
the oppressive family, the adopted family.
Yeah. So what's interesting is what you describe is actually in the scene setting, in the first like 15, 20 minutes. You learn who Harry Potter is. You learn that he's a nerd, that he's being bullied, that he lives with a family that doesn't really love him. All the presents go to his like stepbrother, he lives under the staircase. You learn about all those dynamics. And then, Melis, what did you say?
Everything changes after this.
Yeah, this letter is the inciting incident. There was normal life before that, get explained, that's the scene setting. And then there's a shift, a change in fortune, right? As Aristotle talked about it, the inciting incident. This letter is, hey, it's not all what it seemed, but there's now a change happening because he turns out to be a wizard and he's going off to Hogwarts, right? And so in the story of, and actually it's interesting, Sequoia is quite famous for having this pretty unique question that they tend to ask when learning about it or when hearing a pitch deck, which is, why now? It sounds very simple, but if someone says, hey, there's a problem and we're going to solve it, why now? What has changed? What is the shift that is happening that basically means that this should be or can be solved right now? And so when we start telling the narrative and we start building up that narrative, the first question we ask is, what is the shift that is happening in the market, right? Can you describe what happened 5 years ago in your market and what is happening now? Or what happened before and then, or what you see now, but where it's going. You want to show that there's a certain movement, a certain momentum that basically drives the need for what you're doing right now, right? So there was an old game, there's a new game. And as mentioned, I'll work with Insider as an example. The narrative that we worked on 6-7 years ago, which, like, this is, by the way, the same with strategy. It's good to have a story and a certain way of positioning and a certain narrative, but you're not married to it. And so these things evolve. And so, like, Gong is no longer pushing revenue intelligence as much, but for 3, 4, 5 years, they created a category they wanted, made them stood out, beat the competition. Now, from that position of leadership, they're evolving, and like Insider has done the same. So what I'm showing you now is outdated in a way, but it's very relevant for the stage where they were back then and where many of you might be, right? And so the way they wrote about it was how the world is changing. 15, 20 years ago, any startup or business going digital would be facing huge costs for buying servers and infrastructure. It was the old days. Then, you know, and as a result, infrastructure was the #1 cost on the P&L. Then AWS came. Public cloud made that infrastructure available for cents or dollars. Then the focus all became people. But what's happening now is everything is about growth, about customer acquisition cost. And the #1 cost driver on the P&L is marketing. Notice it doesn't talk about Insider yet. Notice it doesn't talk actually about a problem yet. That comes next, right? It's purely a more objective observation of the shift that is happening in a market, the shift that is happening for a customer. What you should keep in mind is that when you talk about this, and we'll write it down now, I'll show later how you can then show it in slides. But when you then go to customers and you talk about this, you never want to go into a customer and say, hello, Mr. Customer, I know your problem. That's very pedantic. They'll show you out of the room very quickly. But if you say, like, hey, here's what we're seeing, right? We're speaking with many folks who are in similar positions as yours, and what we're observing is that or the other. Very often, this is what they call discovery gold, because in that discovery meaning, you get them to say yes or no, or yeah, I agree, or yeah, in my case, they start giving nuances, and you get into this conversation. So it's not a story where you're like full on pitching, but you're getting into this conversation where you want to always be the expert in your customer's problem. You want to be able to articulate it in a more nuanced, smarter, deeper way that actually get that conversation going, right? So let's take a few minutes where you guys, for yourself, for your companies, write that down. So what's the shift that is happening in your market? It could be a regulatory shift, could be a behavioral shift, could be a technological shift, for example, with AI right now. Sometimes it's not one shift. With Insider, it's one. Very often there's 2 or 3 things coming together. Hey, we're seeing regulations coming in. At the same time, we're seeing behavior shifting in that way. So it doesn't have to be one shift, but think about 1, 2, 3 max things that are changing in your market without focusing too much about the impact or the result or the pain and problems it causes. We'll get to that in the next question. But let's take a few minutes to scribble things down. Yeah?
Is that a silent word?
I'm saying silent, so you can write. Oh, yeah, of course. Oh, no, sorry, but you said it so loud, I thought you asked a question. very easy. And one of the things, I'm not sure if some of you receive pre-work, but we often, when we work with portfolio companies on this, we often first go through exercises of who's your ideal customer profile, your ICP, who's your personas, because that's kind of like your customer, right? Do we understand their jobs to be done? Do we understand the industry structure? Because only when we understand that can we start going into this, what the change is. So that's kind of like a certain depth of understanding you need to have first in a way. Give it one more minute. Does anyone want, was that hard? It sounds like an easy question, but was it hard? No? Okay, you're saying no, it was easy. Can you volunteer what you wrote down?
Sure. We are a biotech startup developing a cure for cancer. So the paradigm shifted within the last decade for cancer cure. I wrote the paradigm shifted for therapeutic perception. The drug development is moving from survival at any cost to quality of life after survival and even during therapy.
Gotcha.
So it is the change of the all drug development perception.
And behavioral perception, the way you approach the cure in a way?
Sure,
Okay.
of course.
Okay, very interesting. Other examples? People want to, oh wow, yeah.
Which one?
There was one there, there was a few there. Yeah, go for it.
Hi, we're building the platform which enables the marketing decisions based on geoanalytics. So basically what is happening now is the more and more decisions are based on data now in marketing, and digitization is happening in outdoor advertising, and more location-based decisions matter, because like people want to make decisions, especially the brands which depend on locations like restaurants and outdoor advertising and all this.
There's more hyper-local things happening that make that relevant.
Yes, and data is enabling all of this happening combined with digitization and AI.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. There was some more.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. I'm not sure we can take them all from a time perspective, but
So we're location intelligence for banks, fintechs.
yeah.
So the market shift is card issuing became easier, new fintechs coming up, and the MPL. So customers have more ways to pay, so there's more competition.
Mm-hmm.
That's the shift.
And there are more ways to pay, and in what aspect is the location-based coming into that?
Knowing their purchase intent before they use a card, you can drive promotions at the right time and location.
Okay. Okay. So I would maybe add something around that. So now it's just saying, hey, there's more cards. So that could be a bit of a so what, but at the same time you're saying like, hey, they want to understand these users better, or they want to be able to understand their intent better so that they can service them better or something like that. It feels like there's a second layer missing.
Yeah.
But
I intentionally wanted to cut it.
Exactly. Okay. It depends on exactly. It depends on where that's coming. That's
Okay,
fair. That's
thanks.
fair. And by the way, for all of you guys, like exercises like this normally take weeks and weeks and weeks, if not more, and a lot of work. We always tell people that this is important, and then there's more urgent stuff, they never do it. So we always ask them to start writing, not thinking that they'll finish in a few minutes, but at least you'll have something, and I'll hopefully, like when this is over and you have a bit more time, you can start to continue to work on it. But anyway, let me get cracking. So what's the market shift that is happening? Then the second question is something else, because if there's a shift happening and no one cares, then like it doesn't really matter. But normally something is really bad is going to happen. So what you see in a lot of the Hollywood movies as well is you want to show the stakes. If it goes in this direction, then either the Earth's going to blow up, or something is going to explode, or something terrible is going to happen, or there's an amazing upside possible, right? And so the second question, very simple, is what's the impact of that shift? What's the problem it leads to, right? And if you can articulate that clearly, and then combined, like normally you'll say like start with the problem, but the problem normally misses nuance. If you have the market shift together with that impact of that shift, you've actually implicitly talked about your customer and who they are and what their job to be done is, and the why now, and the more nuance around the impact, etc. So you've gotten a lot richer way to condition the market before we get to the next step, which is more interesting. But with Insider, we went from there, right? So we talked about the world is changing and everything is now about growth, everything is CAC, but marketing is still very inefficient, right? And to drive growth across the funnel from acquisition to activation, retention, and revenue, companies have to integrate 20-point solutions, leads to significant challenges around integration, blah, 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 blah. Or they pick a legacy marketing cloud, which is costly, clunky, and complex, and as a result, marketing dollars are spent on the wrong customers, right? Still nothing about Insider, pure talking about the impact. And again, when you talk with customers and you talk about this, you'll ask like, hey, how many solutions do you have in your marketing stack? I spoke with a prospect for Insider in Indonesia, one of the largest travel companies in the regions, and I asked the marketing guy, the CMO, how much tools did he have in his growth stack? The answer was 83, right? So he had 83 different SaaS tools and solutions in his overall stack, and all sorts of problems with that. You're starting very broad with an overall market. You're now zooming in on where that problem leads to. And before we get to the company, there's one more step that we'll go through. But take a few minutes to write down, again, flowing from what you've just written, flowing from the change you talked about, what does that lead to from an impact perspective or problem? Or again, sometimes it can be an opportunity, right? For example, with AI right now, there are shifts in AI, and sometimes it means like, hey, because that shift is happening, we're now able to do something that we couldn't do before, which is more an opportunity and something positive than it doesn't always have to be negative, right? We'll take 2 minutes. get going in the end. That one, normally this one is easier, but the challenging part is what do you put in? Well, I'd love to hear yours now that I just said like, maybe add something. How do you structure it between what you put in the change and then in the impact? You want to share?
So when you have many ways to pay, there's bigger competition. So big banks lose share of wallet to new fintechs.
Yeah.
And the new fintechs find it hard to get share of wallet. They're going into a 500 offers, which is not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
So they are in this sort of middle ground where they give money to get the customer, but it's not sustainable because they're losing money.
Gotcha. And your solution focuses on the fintechs or on the traditional banks, or both?
Both of them.
Okay.
Any B2C app that customers understand the journey, they go to Nike, Adidas before they pay, so you can guide them in a targeted way.
Gotcha.
Like
Okay.
Insider, but for physical world.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Other examples?
So basically what is happening is that we are seeing increased budgets to be spent on digital out-of-home advertising, and plus also on the programmatic placement of outdoor advertising. And also we're seeing in retail better decisions based on data, which is decreasing the costs of the mistakes when you open the wrong locations.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, you had your hands up before as well. Which one? The guy behind you? No, behind. Yeah.
Beauty companies are increasingly seeking for deeper personalization. I'm talking about the paradigm shift, and they face major challenges with the online product returns, and most of the consumers don't aware their own needs to struggle to choose most suitable shades or dermatologist products. With the current AI buzz, brands are looking for AI-driven solutions that enable hyper-personalization. And today it's more product quality play for our industry, but within 3 years it's becoming like a growth game like Insider, but as of now it's more product quality. We are a virtual try-on and skin analysis technology company, by the way, in the B2B industry. We are just focusing on B2B. And for the impact, you know, consumer feel more confident buying the products when you guide them on what they need and which options are most suitable for them. And B2B brands and retailers can retain consumers longer on their platforms.
Gotcha. Okay. Nice. 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 What I liked about that second part, what often happens, and in some of the answers I heard a bit of that as well, both for the first two, is that it's very easy to already go technical or already go implicitly around features. You often want, and that's true for investors, but I think for all human beings, there's a psychological aspect. There's obviously the analytical part, but there's the psychological aspect as well. You want to drive a story, and like this is the first drafts, etc. But when you start like editing for copy, etc., then you want to be a bit more visceral. You want to hit them a bit more at the emotive level than purely the features and the functionality. What is the pain that they're experiencing, their life, what's the struggle that they're going through, like somehow making that a bit more felt, then it hits more, just like in stories, when there's more nuance, when there's more emotions in it, it draws you in. So you have to think about the right balance and not go in full like feature technical mode. You try to avoid that a bit. Does anyone recognize this?
Yes.
But what is it called? What we're looking at? The Shire, yeah, the Shire. And what does the Shire look like? What do you feel when you see this?
Peace, heaven.
Peace, heaven, yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, a lot of positive things, right? And so what's very interesting is very often you have this problem and then immediately solution. But what's much more powerful is to first work with your customer to envision the promised land, right? And the Shire, like what sometimes happens when you think about the promised land is, I'm in a shitty place like Harry Potter and I want to get to the promised land. And sometimes it is like, I live in a peaceful environment. I live in where you were saying heaven. Then there's an inciting incident. He goes on a journey and what he wants to come back with becomes the promised land. if only it could be as it used to be, right? But very often it's not like that. Very often it's the Potter arc where it starts shitty and you want to get to the dance party. You want to get to the promised land. And so here the Shire is just a visualization of the promised land. But that's actually the third question. So instead of going from problem immediately to solution, you actually, and this is, again, for folks who have looked at the pre-work, you normally always talk about features and benefits. What we're doing is we're not talking about features yet. But what if you take those benefits of your product and you state them as almost irrefutable facts? Customers these days want this, or what I often say is start this with what if, ... or imagine a world where ... Like if you talk to a customer after he's just talked, there's a shift happening, now there's this pain point. Imagine a world where you could have X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, right? You're imagining the promised land, trying to paint this picture before you say, and we're going to get you there. Like this is the third question out of 4. We're still not talking about yourself. You're not saying, what if Insider could do, or what if Wellbees could do, or what if company A, B, or C could do. You're just purely trying to be in this discovery gold type of environment with the customer, where you talk about trying to tease out what that promised land looks like for them, right? Again, keep it more emotive, keep it not too technical, don't talk about yourself yet, but take 2 minutes to write. And by the way, for Insider, as an example, we said, what if the world looked different? Imagine being able to deliver growth across the funnel, right? What if the platform was fast to implement, easy to use? So instead of first doing the features and then saying, and because of this, it's easy to implement, you say, you basically give all these things so that people like, oh, that would be amazing. If only I could have that, that would be wonderful. That's what you got. You want to get them to salivate, right? And create desire. You've conditioned them. You basically go from very broad, conditioning them to see the world different. Like, hey, yeah, it is true. It is all about growth right now. And that is actually not efficient. And wouldn't it be great if? Yes, that would be great. And only then you start talking about yourself, right? And that's what I was saying. It's not about you. Those first 3 questions is not about you. It's all about them, their world, and ultimately getting to their promised land, what good looks like for them. What does that pot of rainbow look, or pot of gold looks like at the end of the rainbow? So let's take 2-3 minutes to write that down. Okay, folks, we'll get going again. We'll, in the interest of time. So again, this is where you really, the way you want to write it, and maybe not very quickly right now in 2 or 3 minutes, but as you evolve and maybe run some iterations on it, you want to create this very compelling vision of what the world could look like with your product for your customer, right? Such that they have this, you know, amazing thing. Let's keep going to the last section, and I think we have one more piece of Hollywood history to show.
Your new BMW 750. All the usual refinements. Machine guns, rockets, the GPS tracking system.
Welcome. Please fasten seatbelt and obey all instructions for a safe trip.
Thought you'd pay more attention to a female voice.
I think we've met.
I am not interested in your sordid escapades. Let's get on with it, shall we? Your new telephone.
Talk here, listen here. So that's what I've been doing wrong all these years.
Look, it also includes a fingerprint scanner and a 20,000 volt security system, and this I'm particularly proud of. The remote control for your car. Tap twice. 1, 2. Now, draw your finger very slowly across the pad to drive the car. Well, it's surprisingly difficult to drive, but with practice...
Well, let's see how she responds to my touch, EQ. Think we understand each other?
Grow up, 007.
So funny how this tech that you're seeing right now looks like, sure, Tesla can do that and my phone can do that and the fingerprint scanner, but obviously when they showed this, the entire world was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And so Bond is the most, all the Bond movies are the most formulaic if you think about it. Like every time it starts with the scene setting, then there's an inciting incident, then he goes on the journey, and about 20% in that movie or into the story, he goes to visit Q. And normally it's in a basement and he's touching all sorts of stuff and stuff explodes in the back and it's always this funny scene with all these gadgets. But again, these are the so-called magic gifts. If you think about it, if you think about your customer as the hero and your company as the mentor, you know, Dumbledore gives an invisibility cloak, or Bond has all these magic gifts, whether it's a flamethrower or a camera ring or explosive toothpaste or like whatever. These are the things that help your customer be successful, right? And so we've just talked about the high level, you know, what if, or the world is changing, it's creating an impact. What if it could look different? What if there could be a new game? What if it could be different? What if there would be this amazing future? And now you're saying, here's how we're going to get you there. So how do you take your customer to that ideal state, right? How do you make them succeed, like going from pain to strain to ultimately gain? How do you call this new game? How do you call that category? Because this is where the category piece comes in. You've now set it up in such a way that you can start defining the category. And so in the case of Insider, I'm not going to read the entire answer, but what's interesting is enter, this is kind of like a way to begin, like enter X, or now we have, or presenting, like whatever you do, but this is where you introduce your company for the first time. Again, the first 3 questions have all been conditioning, have all been scene setting in a way, and now you're saying enter Insider, and the category name that we talked about that back then and that was used for a few years was growth management platform. That didn't exist yet. It was basically making, again, stepping back from personalization, optimization, segmentation, predictive analytics, etc., to what are we enabling for customers? We're enabling growth, right? And just as the examples of Gong and the examples of Qualtrics, it's stepping back, it's zooming out from the features and functionalities to the impact that you're enabling, which is growth. And then you start talking about your features. Hey, it's a single stack from acquisition to activation to revenue instead of point solutions. There's a product suite, blah, 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 blah. That's when you start off talking about your features. Very often you ask someone, what do you do? And you say, oh, we're an analytics company and we do, and they come with this. They start the story there, right? Tends to not work, specifically not with a broader audience. I'll talk about that in a second. So this is a way, like, and right now you've done it per question, but the reason for putting it down is if you read this all in one go, it's one story that flows, and you have your narrative, right? Now, that narrative could live on your website or it could live somewhere or whatever, but what's more important is how you use it, and we'll talk about that. But what's interesting is what you see here is, and we often talk about this as the artifacts. You want to have a narrative. Within that narrative, you want to have a clear category name, and you want to have some sort of four-word story, as we often talked about it. So if you looked at this is address the experience gap, experience management platform. We have a company in the portfolio called Adlan Data, which has that Gong, say goodbye to opinions, 4 words, revenue intelligence platform, making you grow faster. It's very, very consistent and very concise. And very often this is the challenge when folks, and I often have it like for Insider, for many portfolio companies, I used to interview the C-level when they would make new hires. And it's happened quite a few times, not with Insider, with other companies, that, for example, a CMO candidate I would be interviewing, and she says like, hey, I've spoken with 5, 6 people in the company. What do they really do? They all 5 gave me a different answer, right? And you might laugh, but like it happens a lot. And if you just look at certain companies and you look at what people say on their LinkedIn profile for those companies, same company, it all looks different. Ultimately, you want to get to a shorter version of what I just said. That is basically, everyone has that. Everyone knows the story. Everyone speaks the same lingo, has the same approach in talking about the company, etc. From a time perspective, we skip writing this last one. But what's important is this. I always say test for versatility. I just said don't make it too technical. Like, as an investor, what I often have to do is when I speak about my work, I don't speak about Sequoia or now about my angel investments, but you speak about the companies. So I need to be able to have a very succinct way to speak about many different companies I work with. And so I've started to apply that framework for myself as well, because I want to be able to explain something complex to even my grandma when I run into her at a birthday party, God forbid, right? And so that happens a lot. You speak with people outside your little bubble, and you want to be able to talk about something. Like, I mentioned earlier, I think a quantum company, quantum software company, like that's a good test. Can I explain to my sister who's in a completely different field why that quantum software company is very interesting, right? So you want to test for versatility. Can you make people feel something when you tell the story? This is what I spoke about earlier. It has to be somewhat emotive, and maybe not for people who are completely in a different field, but for the customer, they need to get excited by it, or they need to feel that fear when you talk about the change or the impact. They need to feel the, oh wow, when you talk about the promised land, etc. What I often get, and a lot of the conversations I had with Serhat at Insider, is when we talked about this story, he said, yeah, but like if I speak with people here, like they don't resonate. They want to immediately get to the bits and bytes. They want to immediately get to the segmentation and personalization. So I often say, like, you need to be able to have this story written in such a way that I can use it with startups or enterprises, with CXO, with VP, with mid-level, with junior, etc. By the way, and that's actually the last point here. Can we use it as a foundation both in my customer pitch, my employee pitch, and my investor pitch? This is not the full story. I often say this is the first 4 or 5 slides. This is the scene setting, right? If it's with an investor, you go from there and then you say, okay, and here's the product, and here's the metrics, and here's the strategy, and here's the go-to-market, and here's the team, and you have the investor pitch follow. If it's with a customer, you obviously go into the customer more deeply and into the product. So it's only 4 or 5 slides in the beginning where you basically frame the conversation, and you frame the company, and you explain the narrative and the category, etc., right? And so when I would be pitching, like, for example, the Insider story, not to a CMO, but to a mid-level, like, marketing or SEO guy or whatever, I still need to be able to go from there and then say, this is what it means for you, and this is what it means, but they also then get to feel that they're part of something bigger, right? So in the case of Insider, how we showed it visually was, at least for a certain period, was very visually that the market shift that is happening. I don't need to repeat it. The impact, right? Customers that don't spend come back. What we didn't talk about as much, but what some people have in there as well is like why current solutions don't work. And actually we had as part of the problem in a way, right? Marketing clouds are complex, clunky, and costly. Point solutions result in all sorts of integration, data, vendor issues. What if you could have something in the middle? What if you could have something that, right, promised land, single platform across the entire growth stack, powered by some strong AI and machine learning, and all based on a unified data platform that's easy to implement, blah, 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 blah. So 3-4 slides, and then enter, and then you can go into what you do. So it can actually be very succinct and very short. Now again, this is no longer what's being used, but at the point in time in that journey when we went from 5 to 100 million ARR, it was used for quite a while, so served its purpose. But that's the framework, right? And so that's what I wanted to talk about. I'm not sure how we are for time, but I'm happy to take some questions, if that's okay. Yeah? Any questions? Mike's coming.
Can you suggest any book or any training to develop ourselves for storytelling?
Play Bigger, for sure.
I got that one.
Yeah, and then there's another one, which is less a book, but more a guy that you can follow and who's produced a lot of content also on YouTube called Andy Raskin. And he refers to it, so he, like again, Play Bigger is very much around category creation. The point of view and story is one part of that. Andy Raskin focuses primarily on that, which he refers to as strategic narrative, the strategic narrative of the company. And a lot of the concepts in his framework is very closely aligned to the way he talks about it. Yeah, yeah, cool. Other questions? Okay. Oh yeah, there, in the end, in the back.
So, we have a platform, and we day by day we can build different products. So we still haven't productized it, right? So we can basically shape our story every week, like week by week, our story shapes. So how do we iterate that story with the customers? How do we know when our story is ready? Like how does that ideal iteration process look like?
Cool. Let me take a step back from your question, because when you say that the product changes all the time and so my story changes all the time, I would disagree with you. Because again, it's not about you, it's about that market. That market shift is there, it doesn't change. The impact of that market shift doesn't change. The way you view that market doesn't change. The promised land doesn't change. How you execute on that with your product and your product roadmap, that part is changing, right? So again, if your question suggests to me that you're too deep into the product because you think the product is the story, it's not, right? And so you have to take that step back and say, hey, if I go through this framework, like if you're obviously, you know, pivoting every week between a completely different market and completely different customers here and there, then yeah, then you have an issue, right? Then you have a much bigger issue to deal with, I guess. But if you're clear on who your target market is, who your customers are, who within your customers the personas are, what challenges you're trying to help them with, then your story doesn't change. What's changing is the product. One of the things that we've actually seen a lot is where early stage company says, here's everything that we want to build, but right now we only got that. And they ask me, can we already claim that category, right? And I often say, yeah, you can, and you have to, because if you don't do it, someone else does. But you have to be honest. So there was one company where we work with, we basically explained the whole narrative and then said, and that's why we're building this category. Starting with that, we now offer this, and in the near future, we will be building that. And it's beautiful. If I now look back, they executed on that. And so it's funny, before Hande and Fadi were talking about strategy, they often say when it comes to category, and in Play Bigger, they literally have that book, they have the quote, category is strategy. Once you're very clear on the category that you want to build, it basically, you'll know which people I need to hire. Do I need to acquire this company or not? There was one company I worked with, once we had the category clear, they fired their entire M&A department because they realized that they were not going to be able to buy, or they didn't want anything to buy because they had to build it themselves, etc. So hiring, M&A, product roadmap, all depends on that clarity. And so what I liked about what Fadi was saying is around strategy, like don't talk too much about it. Once you have clarity on what you want to build, like just execute and go there. And it's, but that clarity of your North Star is important. And you should be able to build that story whilst building and iterating on your product underneath. But that story needs to be, you know, you can write, I think. Last question? Yeah.
Hi, so my question is that when you offer this promised lands to pipeline, to customers in your pipeline, most of the time, especially in our cases, our customers do not think that this solution is true, because if you implement something that hasn't been executed before, it might be hard for the customer to understand that this is a solution and it's working. Because what you offer is too good to be true for them most of the time. So how can you convince your customer that your value proposition is working, it is there, and this promised Neverlands is not far away from them? Because especially in my cases, for example, it is sometimes hard for customer to understand our value proposition is 100% working. Because for them, it is something impossible before. So how can we convince them?
Yeah, I think a very good question, and I think that question is broader in the sense that it's not just about your story, but with any early stage company, and specifically with emerging technology, there's always this question around what they call the RTB, the reason to believe. How can you give them a reason to believe that it's even possible? And so what a lot of early stage companies do is they prove it in a trial or in a proof of concept, or they work extensively on case studies so that when they have one or two case studies, that they can speak about that, and they get those customers to be able to do reference calls, etc. Like when you have zero, again, when there's nothing yet and nothing proven, then back to what Mike Moritz said, you have to make them believe by convincing them and telling a great story. But the key thing is to get more and more proof points, and the early proof points are customer trials, etc. Then the next level proof points are paying customers, being able to speak about them, etc. I remember in a later stage with Merve, the CMO for Insider, there was these discussions around we're challenging the big guys, Adobe and Salesforce and whatever, and they're all on Gartner and Forrester and G2, and we're not. How do we crack that? We needed that level of credibility, and then right now, like Insider is featured in all the grids and the matrices and whatever are used. Again, it's constantly building a reason to believe for customers, proof points. It gets easier once you're at that scale, and in the early days it is hard. And so, yeah, you know, and sometimes it's not a proof point for the entire solution, but hey, this we got to work, or this we got to demo, or like, but you know, the more you can show, don't tell, the more powerful it is normally. So, we're running out of time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say thank you. If you're done.
Yeah, we're done.
Thank you so much. Peter, when you see the video that we put together for tomorrow, for the beginning of the summit, you will hear Merve's voice in the video. The reason to believe in Turkey. And I think it has a lot to do with what you said, and so your influence is going to be on the video.
Nice.
So,
thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. This was obviously a very small portion of what is a very long discussion, and hopefully you'll be thinking about this for the days to come. Peter will be with us all day today, and also will be at the summit tomorrow, but obviously we have about 850 sign-ups for tomorrow, so it's much better to catch him here. So we have a coffee break now. We ask that everybody comes back in 20 minutes, so please enjoy. 20.